Special edition of the radio show with Mark Lee. And of course, we've got a good interview that we're going to have with an amazing author. Looking forward to hearing about their great book that they have written and what they've got going on in their life, some of the life lessons learned, and all along those kind of spaces. So it'll be a fun conversation had with Yvonne Zayer and all in that space. Hoping that I am pronouncing the last name right and definitely all in that kind of way. So definitely it'll be a fun and wonderful conversation and looking forward to it and learning more about this amazing individual who has written an amazing book and all in that space. So definitely looking forward to learning many of the things that they have going on in their life and all in that space. I know here in Durham, North Carolina, it's been very hot because that's where I'm based at. And all along those lines, I think we're hitting 95, might even be feeling like 100 and all in that space. So a lot of folks have been staying inside, enjoying the air conditioning and all in that kind of way. So how are things going in your part of the world and how are things doing in terms of the weather? Because I know it can be very hot on the West Coast as well, because there were those whole fires in Maui and around California and a number of other places. So we do know that the weather can impact us as well. So I was just wondering how your day was going on this particular Friday afternoon.
Well, it's warm. I haven't been outside yet, but I think it's probably in the high 80s, maybe even 90s. But
Well,
last week we had that hurricane watch. We never really had a hurricane, but it did rain.
wow. And it was a serious rain from what I remember and everything. So there was
And,
definitely some
they
intense.
said that, but it wasn't even a hard rain. It was like steady for like a day and a half, but I don't know, wasn't hard here.
Well, that's good. I know here in North Carolina, we had some trees fall down, some power that impacted. I don't have any kids of my own, but I do have my two nephews, and they actually got, because they're in the year round as opposed to the whole notion of traditional, and they actually got a 5 day weekend because the storm came in. I think it was on a Tuesday, and they were out Tuesday till through Friday of last week, and then of course their usual Saturday and Sunday. So they got a nice little 5 day weekend, and I'm sure that they enjoyed having that break and having that opportunity to get that kind of uh, reprieve from school and everything. And I just recently learned because I was talking to a friend of mine that works in our school system that some of our more traditional school systems may be going year round as well. So that'll be interesting to see how that plays out and all in that life. One thing that I found really interesting about you, Yvonne, because like I said, and I mentioned earlier, you have written a number of books and some great books, and all along those lines was that you have been a student of philosophy and religion and spiritual healing most of your adult life. So I was wondering if you had any of that when you were a child as well, because I know that I went to a university in Milwaukee, a Jesuit university, and I have jokingly said that I think that I had two minors because I had the minor of poli sci with a degree in journalism. But I also, if you go to certain Jesuit universities or certain colleges, they require about 21 hours of philosophy and theology, and that is definitely what Marquette did. So, as far as I'm concerned, you might as well say that there was a second minor with 21 hours of philosophy and theology, because that's about as much as some minors are. So, I'm just thinking that I might have had a second minor.
Can I ask you a question about that? Being a Jesuit college, did they actually insist that you learn about Catholicism, or was it just anything in?
It was a mixture because one of my professors was actually very much into liberation theology, which is this notion of using theology even in social change and all in that space. There was another one that was much more conservative in the sense of Catholicism and all of that, and he was definitely more of a traditional Jesuit in that sense. So they definitely had different kind of dichotomies in what they were doing, and then there were even some open courses that were more philosophically based, kind of like around Socrates and around some of the Greek and Roman philosophers and in that space. So they weren't all just strictly Catholic oriented or Catholicism oriented courses. But yeah, there were some professors that were definitely teaching stuff that was more on the philosophical side, and even in some of the theology courses other parts of theology were involved as well. And then I personally have some friends of mine, including and some relatives that are more on the Native American side of our heritage. So they definitely are very much into some of that tradition of religion as well. So they are very much into like the powwow culture and some of the things in that space. So I know that I personally have had a lot of background in different things. I even had a friend that was a Yoruba priestess, and I've had a couple of other. Actually, I've had a couple of friends that are Yoruba priestesses, and then I've had some friends that have gone through some different other kind of religious and philosophical thoughts.
I see. Were most of the professors Jesuits themselves?
It was a mixture because it's a liberal arts college, so I would say that a vast majority of them probably weren't Jesuit because I don't think that I'm not sure if George Reedy, who was one of my history, one of my journalism professors, who was also the press secretary for LBJ. I'm not sure that he was Jesuit that I can recall because I know, but then again, he was under LBJ, not Kennedy, and I know Kennedy was our one and only Roman Catholic president. Because, like I said, I grew up in North Carolina. Didn't really, my parents aren't overly religious. I would say that they definitely have some spiritual beliefs, and mom is definitely a member of the home church where grandma was, and all along those lines. But they weren't like overly active, and grandma and dad on dad's side was definitely not overly active in that religious sense and everything. So while growing up around the Baptist community, I chose to go to a Catholic university because of some civil rights ties. So a good friend of the family was involved in civil rights and told me about the journalism program there, and that I might want to consider it as a place to go back in the 80s. But a number of the professors, because they have some great programs in a number of fields. Journalism is one. They had a strong engineering program. I want to say there was a strong law and dental program. There were a couple of other very strong programs. And while there were a decent amount of the student body that was a Jesuit, I wouldn't say that it was the vast majority. And I also wouldn't say that it wasn't a lot of other things that were being taught and even being shared by various cultures because it was definitely a multicultural campus.
Interesting.
Yeah, but it was like I said, that was 4.5 years ago, back in the early '80s, that I went there, and it was quite interesting. And all along those lines, when did you first get interested in the whole notion of just religion and spirituality and everything in your whole life over there in California? And I know with a
Well,
Latin background, it might have tied to
yeah.
well.
Well, my parents were Catholic. My mother was a very devout Catholic. In fact, she was in a convent, and so she raised us very Catholic. And I thought that that's was it for me. But we had a tragedy in our family
Mhm,
with my brother when he was young, and it sent me in a tailspin of questioning everything. I literally went from, and we're talking about in the early 70s,
mhm,
in a barrio, a Latino barrio, that everybody's Catholic. No, they're far and few between were Christians, like Baptists or Protestant, and people thought they were weird because everybody was Catholic. So nobody was open to anything else. And I literally went to every church. First, I started with the Catholic Church, but when you get your answer is, it's the will of God, and there's no other answer as to why bad things happen
mhm,
all the time. I went to a Christian church. I went to the Mormon church. I went to Islam. I went to Buddhism. I went to everything, and I couldn't find the answer. And I'm the kind of person, even to now, people like say, "Why do you always ask why?" Because I have to know why. If I don't know the why, I can't process it. So I decided to read the Bible from front to cover, cover to cover. And I really focused for some reason on Jesus's words and two phrases. One where he said, "You can be as I am." And the second was, "Ask and you shall receive."
mhm,
So I did. I asked every day, "God, show me the way. I feel empty now. Show me the way."
mhm,
Well, after about a month of that, I started seeing in my mind's eye every night the word reincarnation. And I thought, well, I didn't even understand what that meant. I was in my early 20s and I
mhm,
had never heard of it really. Make a really long story short, I wound up going to the library and doing some research. Well, I wanted to do research, but I couldn't find a book until, like a movie, I looked up and I saw a book that had reincarnation in block letters, exactly what I was seeing in my mind's eye. I took that book and I read it, and it changed my life completely and everything I thought. I mean, I cried when I read that book because it was as if I had known everything in that book but forgotten it.
Oh wow.
So when I decided, oh, I understand now, I started trying to tell everybody. Everybody thought that I was going crazy. My father said, "Stás clona, she's crazy now because of what happened to my brother, that I couldn't accept it." But that wasn't it. So I stayed quiet for 30 years,
Uh,
only studying myself. And I've studied so many things and so many ways, and I feel like I understand
yeah.
life and God and the universe. I mean, I feel that. I could be wrong, but
Only time will tell, and definitely as we go through life and go through the journeys of life and even the next dimensions, I guess that's when we find out and everything. But you said something that was interesting to me because I remember a long time ago, my dad had invited both me and my younger brother over to come watch this documentary. I think it was a documentary on ABC. I can't remember if it was either Peter Jennings or Ted Koppel that was doing it. And they were looking at the world religions, and what they found is that while the extremes seem to be oftentimes the ones in control, the actual tenets of the world religions are more similar than they are different in everything. And
oh,
I said that's cool.
absolutely. Absolutely. It's almost like right in front of your face, but people don't want to see it. Like if you take Islam and you take Christianity, literally it's the same thing except for their problem is Jesus isn't God, or Jesus God didn't have a child. They're missing the whole symbolic point of everything. It's they all go to the same place, just different ways. You know, for me, I mean, and I hope I don't offend anybody. I don't believe in religion. I believe in the higher power of life, of the source of the universe. You know, there isn't a God that sits there and says, "You're going to die in a war, and you're not going to die in a war. Your house is going to get burned down, but that house isn't." Really, that doesn't even make any sense to me. Oh, I'm sorry, to me.
No, that makes a lot of sense and everything. I know that my dad, who is a visual artist, actually had a piece of artwork that was kind of this uh, renegade art that is kind of like displayed and everything. And it is actually to the point that you were just making because it was called Thoughts and Prayers. And it was literally using like the fire, the thing that you pull for the fire alarm and all along those lines. But was in it was the words literally thoughts and prayers because his notion is that a lot of time whenever a disaster happens, we automatically tell people we want to give them thoughts and prayers, and thoughts and prayers are important, and they definitely are something that we should be passing on. But the gist of the artwork was that a lot of times people need more than thoughts and prayers; they need some actual action and everything. So sometimes that is like giving empty platitudes and all in that space. So I think that was the gist of what the artwork was. Was there? Are you really truly doing what you should be doing in those spaces, or are you just kind of like saying it because it seems like the positive thing to say when sometimes if somebody was in a hurricane and they lost their house, they might need a actual shelter or they might need some actual food in their stomach and all along those lines. But definitely that was the gist of the artwork, and from what I'm hearing of your philosophy, it sounds like you would have a similar type philosophy that we need action and not necessarily just the accolades or the kind of simple words and everything.
Yeah, and I take it a step further to say, like, if there's 2 people and both families are good families, why does one family get hurt or devastated and the other doesn't? Is that the choice of God, or is what is it? And that's how I felt. What started me on my journey was why? Why do bad things happen to some people and not others?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah. And speaking of that, I know because speaking of people in the family, my brother works with a lot of kids that are quote unquote at risk kids, and all along those lines. And of course, a number of them have been either incarcerated or lost their lives because of gang violence. And I know
Mhm,
that you even make a
mhm.
connection between the supernatural fantasy books and the true life stories of gang violence, which I know take place both in California, Texas, and even here in North Carolina. So I just wondered if you could share with our readers and our listeners some of the concepts of how they are related.
Okay, so when you live in a neighborhood that's infested with gang violence, you have tragedies, everyday tragedies. in families, good families, bad families. Uh, my connection to it was because there was so much of that going on when I was young. I took solace in reading fantasies,
Mhm.
and fantasies took me to a world of magic and wonder, and it took me away from from the everyday true life. But when you get to thinking and writing, okay, I'm going to talk about the book for 1 second.
Yeah.
I wrote that book, but I feel like I didn't really write it because I started to write it and then I just kept writing. I didn't have a draft. I didn't have an idea. I just wrote it. After I wrote it, I would read it and think, I don't even really remember writing that. And why would I write that? The book turned out to be about energy because
Mhm.
the whole point of life is energy. Energy is everything.
Mhm.
And what you think, what you speak, what you see, what you hear, it all it all accumulates to a certain type of energy. And in my book, it winds up being it's supposed to start it started out as a silly werewolf book and it
Mhm.
ended up as a book about energy
Yeah. Well,
is what it ended up to be. So, I mean, being in a gang is like being in a country.
mhm.
There's always a war. Why? For what?
How much of the stuff that you think that we see in books? Because I'm thinking about like the not just your book, but the classic werewolf stories and the classic Dracula stories. I used to be a fan back in the day of True Blood and a number of other things along those lines. But how much of those things do you think we are seeing played out in reality? Because I sometimes think that some of the things that are quote unquote fantasy might even be real life. Because I know that even during the pandemic, there were a number of people that felt there were a lot of people that were walking around in almost like a zombie-like state because they were concerned about what was going on and didn't really know what to do with their lives, and it become kind of listless. And I know that there are people that will even say that even before the pandemic, folks used to regularly go to work, whatever their work was, not really having a passion about it and really just kind of like going through the motions of a life and everything. So I know that there are those classic stories, whether it's the werewolf one or whether it's the vampires or whether it's a number of other ones that I could get to, even the Frankensteins around the world and everything that seem like they might have been having some basis in true reality as well. If we go back to the historical stories and all along those lines. But I just wanted your thoughts about that because there are also people that will give the counter argument that they are almost I hate to use this term, but I'm a blues fan, and people don't always like blues music either.
I
But they
love
will say
blues.
that it is kind of an evil reflection of what is going on in society, and that it is damaging our psyche when we go into these kind of monster-like stories. But I think that there are a lot of walking around monsters, including some that might be in charge of our political landscape and some other landscapes as well. But I'm just wondering your take on the narration and whether we have a lot of people that are living what is considered fantasy in reality.
Well, okay, that's a very loaded question, and so many people could get so offended at my real thoughts. But I'm going to start by saying this: absolutely, that these books, the reason that so many people like them, it's just the same thing as Star Wars
Mhm.
and the Lord of the Rings, is because it is a reflection of us. We all have a dark side.
Right.
Some of us choose to follow that, some of us choose not to, but everything is polar. I believe that the amount of ability a person has to be good, they have equal ability to be evil.
Mhm.
And the evil person that's evil has the equal amount of ability to be good. We all have that because we're all polar and we're all energy. Which one do you choose to use? So when you read a book and you read about the monster, have you ever noticed that most monsters do have a redeeming quality?
Mhm.
Well, in my book, they do. I mean, but in
Not
life
only,
in general,
yeah, life in general, not only do they have a redeeming quality, but usually they if you look at the superheroes, they usually became monsters because something had gone against them, some sort of accident
right?
had caused a tragedy or something that happened that was a disaster in their life, the loss of a parent, the loss of whatever. Because I'm
Mhm.
thinking about like the Batman
Batman. Mhm.
and the Superman villains, a lot of them had gone into some tragic incidences that caused them. when some in some cases to become the superhero like a Batman or Spider-Man, but also the villains like the Joker or the Riddler or a number of other ones. There was something that happened in their life, whether it was a fire or a loss of a loved one or something else that caused them to go down that quote unquote wrong path.
Right. It's just like one of my other things that I like to do is write short stories on incidents. They're not necessarily completely based on truth, but they're a lot based on truth because people have, in general, uh, I don't mean to be like racist or something, but people who aren't in that environment of gangs, like people who've never lived there or never understood it, they tend to think that these people are just thugs. They're horrible people. They want to do bad things. But that's not true because you know what? They're normal people that have a father that and a mother that love them. They have sisters that love them. They have wives and girlfriends and children that love them. They're not what people paint them to be. But if you don't give these people a name and an identity and a story, then that's what people think.
Yeah, no, I
So so my passion is writing these stories and giving these people an identity because it's easy to say that person is a horrible person because they killed somebody on a drive-by shooting, but it's nothing's ever as simple as it seems.
no, I definitely agree with you in that. One thing I was curious about, because like I said, you definitely grew up to some degree in that kind of environment and everything. Is what do you think? Because it sometimes amuses me. That doesn't always amuse me when some of the people that become celebrities in that sense, they kind of like tell their own narrative, but the narrative may not always be factual. Like I've heard that some of the successful, and I'm not saying all, because there are some that definitely grew up in that environment, but there have definitely been some successful rappers and some successful rock artists that talk about the hard life that they led and everything, but then you find out that they led more of a middle class life, and if they had actually been thrown into Compton, they might not actually survive. And I was just looking to put it that way.
Well, I feel that that's like it's not exactly survivor's guilt, but
Right,
it's kind of like they wish that they had gone through that so they
right.
could prove their merit and prove that that they came out good. But sometimes it's not as easy as it seems.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that. But and another thing that I know we talk about on this network and other things else is that a lot of the people that are in those kind of environments, meaning the gangs and the barrios and a number of other things, that they are actually have a lot of skill sets that could be even used for other kind of businesses. I know
Oh,
that there have been a
absolutely.
number of them that have become successful entrepreneurs because at the end of the day, if you are a I just hate to use this word, but I'm going to say it. If you're a drug runner, or even if you're running the ladies, there is an aspect of business that is there. And I know that a lot of the folks that are working with some of these kids are trying to get them to change their direction and maybe put it in a different direction. So maybe like run a truck company instead of running the drugs, whatever the drugs may be and everything. But like you said, it's sometimes easier said than done, depending on what the kind of society is and what the culture is of that society. But I've heard a number of people that are like, hey, they have some strong skills. Why don't they use those skills for something else? And what is your answer to folks that make that argument?
Well, from the neighborhood that
Mhm.
I was actually in the middle of two rival neighborhoods, so I knew
Mhm.
both sides. There's about, I would say, 3 to 4 famous people that came out of those neighborhoods.
Right.
One of them is a person that, uh, he became the tattoo artist to the stars. His
Mhm.
name's Freddie Negretti. He grew up in my neighborhood. Another guy, Luis, Hernandez, who wrote, I might get his last name wrong. He wrote "Always Running." That's
Mhm.
from the neighborhood that I grew up in. Uh, there's a lot of people who have who are strong at heart, and they are able to pull themselves out of it. There are a lot of people, myself included. Although I wouldn't say that I was ever a gang member, I never was, but I lived there. My brother was. Everybody around me was. But I don't know, for me, it always just seems sad. It just seems sad. It's I think that yes, people can get out of it if they have help, and I think that that's part of why I do what I do is I want my biggest thing is meditation. Okay, we're going to get into that right now.
Yeah.
I believe that if we can teach the youth of today to meditate,
Hmm.
that that would change their lives completely. I believe that with all my heart.
I
I
can definitely
believe.
see. Yeah, I can definitely see meditation being very strong and everything. And I also think that sometimes if you are bringing your truth into creativity, that is also something that is very important for people to do as well. I've got a couple of friends that are playwrights and authors and a number of
Mhm,
other things in that space, and they sometimes will bring their journey into their stuff. I've got a friend of mine who is a funk musician, and he sometimes talks about spiritual funk because he's actually added some spirituality into that style of music that he does and all along those lines. And I've definitely got some friends that have written about social issues in their plays and in their books and even in some cases their music as well. So I know you've got a play. I know you're a playwright in addition to
mhm.
being an author. And is Brother actually based on your own brother, and how much of that is factually based, and how has the success been of that book?
Well, that was in a book. It was a short play that I wrote,
That's what I
and
said.
yes, it was based exactly on my brother. And I go through a series of things that happened. Again, I'm trying to give identity and life to people. You know, if you saw my brother, you would be afraid of him if you walked down the street and saw him.
Right.
But my brother was a sweet, kind-hearted soul. His life didn't allow for him to grow that way. He died young, not very young, but young enough, and it just talks about all the things that made him the person that he was, and do the things that he did. And at the end of the play, what I say to him after we go through all those things that he went through, I said, brother, and I had intentionally never said names. He addressed me as sister, and I addressed him as brother, because I wanted anybody who saw it to be able to relate, that that could be their conversation with their brother. And I said to him, and this is supposed to be that he's dead already, and I'm going by thinking about him, and then he appears to me, and we have this conversation. And I said, brother, would you do it all different if you could? And he answers me, no, sister, I would not. If I, but I should have said that last. What he says to me, if I didn't live the life I lived, my kids wouldn't be who they were. If I didn't live the life I lived, you wouldn't be who you were. You are. So everything happens for a reason. And that was my role to play in my spiritual development and everybody else's spiritual development around me. So no, I would not do it differently. Oh, and because there were things that my father did, he says, and no, I don't hate my father. And that was like a conversation that maybe I wished we would have had, but it was very poignant. And many people came up to me crying and told me, I felt like that was me having a conversation with my brother, because many people had those same things happen in their life, because it's cultural.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we definitely coaching and everything. I know one of the other things that you talk about, at least that I learned from podcast guests and everything else, is that there is a conversation not just around the things that we can deal with in terms of our socioeconomic basis, but also in terms of our health and everything. So I was wondering how much has that played
Mhm.
a role in your life as well? Because I do know that you have and I'm not sure what the disability is, but I know I've got relatives that have had everything from MS to having friends and relatives that have suffered from Alzheimer's and other kind of diseases. And I know that the current term is differently able, because then the truth of the matter is we all have a disability of one form or another. I know that I have dysgraphia, which is like a form of dyslexia. I mean, if you are with me in a car and you want to tell me to go right or left, it might take me a little bit longer than the average person to figure out which direction we are going in, because that's one of the aspects of it. There are other aspects of it as well and everything, including some motor skill kind of stuff that goes on with it as well. But I was just wondering, how much has the meditation helped with your whatever your own disability is? Because I do know that that is something that they brought up in your bio and everything.
Right. So my disability is, when I was 12, I was diagnosed with a very, very, very severe scoliosis. When I was 20, they said that I had to have a Harrington rod put in my back, or I wouldn't be able to walk by the time I was 50. Well, those are all long stories. I didn't do it. So here I am in my 50s and I'm having problems walking and breathing and I'm in pain constantly. I allowed myself to gain so much weight from inability to move, and I had a real thriving business. I lost it because I couldn't walk, and at that point, even though I knew I should be meditating, like I told you, I learned about that when I was in my 20s and the 70s.
Mhm.
I really felt I wasn't a meditator because I couldn't clear my mind. At that point, that I was the worst that I could ever be, I just started meditating. Meditating changed my life because after I started meditating every single day, synchronicity started to occur. I started to heal myself with essential oils and constant meditation. And I went from taking 5 types of pain medications to one type because because I'm still in pain and I haven't been able to heal myself completely, but I've healed my mind. So when the universe said you can't walk anymore, I said to myself, "Well, I'm not done. What can I do? I can write because I can think." So I went from working a job. I had a business that was very financially good, and I stopped all that. And I went through a period of feeling sorry for myself till I picked myself up. And all this is through meditation. And I started to write. And in that time of writing, which has only been like 3 years, I've produced 2 plays and 2 manuscripts. I'm working on my third.
Wow. So you
So
definitely go ahead.
meditation.
Yep. No, it sounds like some strong meditation, and all along those lines, it definitely has got you on a certain path, and all along those lines. One of the things I know we talk about oftentimes on this show as well as other shows is that self doubt. And it sounds like you have not allowed self doubt to creep into your mind and everything. I know some people call it the imposter syndrome. And sometimes we have folks that are in our family and friend circles that are very supportive. And sometimes we have folks that are sabotaging the things that we are doing and all along those lines. So I was wondering how much
That's
of
an
that
excellent.
have you faced yourself where you have sabotaged yourself, and how much have you had to deal with folks that have not been as supportive as you would like them to be, whether that is family members or friends, and all in that space?
That's a very excellent question. I don't think nobody's asked me that, but that's an excellent question because, yes, I do. At the very beginning, when I started writing, I said to myself, I'm not a writer, but you know what? I journal. I'm just going to write. And then I said to myself, I decided to write. I want everybody to meditate. That was my first manuscript. I wanted, especially people of color or of a different Latinos,
Mhm.
blacks, people who don't usually do that, people who can't afford to go to a guru or can't afford to pay $1,500 to learn how to meditate with chupa, you know, you,
Right.
you so I said, I'm going to write a meditation book geared towards people who don't read a lot and everything. I started writing that, but then I would read it and it sounded awful. And I thought, well, I don't know how to write. Well, like I said, the meditation brings synchronicities. I found one day in my email an invitation to join a class from a person, which she's very well known in certain areas. Her name is Laurel Erica,
Mhm.
and she does word magic. I took a class with her and I read her my manuscript, and she was floored. She said, Yvonne, what makes you think that you're not a writer? Okay, so everybody else, your question, like my family, my friends, and they would be like, oh, she's writing now, not taking it seriously. My kids didn't even read my book. My husband hasn't read my book. The- It's everybody else. I have now a network of people and everybody else that love my work. But it's funny. Well, I take it back. When I did my play, everybody in my family went to play my brother. Every single one of them, including the men, cried.
Mhm. That's
So
amazing. Along those same lines and everything, as a author, and I know a lot of times people are trying to find advice from folks that have gone through similar things, whether that's a hardship or whether that health issues or a number of other things. But what advice would you give to somebody today? So, what is something that you learned as a adult that you wish you had learned as a kid? So if you were to go back and talk to the younger version of yourself, what kind of things would you tell them, and what kind of things would you tell those young people of today? Because a lot of them, I think, are trying to figure out their next steps, and it hasn't helped that we've been in the middle of all kinds of crisis, everything from
Right.
9/11, if they're in their 20s on up to their pandemic, to a number of other things. I personally think that that's why a lot of our kids, and I, even though I don't have any, I do consider my nephews to be part of my next generation that is on the way, and all along those lines. Even the kids of friends of mine that I sometimes mentor and everything, and I do hear them talk about the suicide aspect, and a lot of them are considered, and I think way too many of them are considering it.
Okay. So first of all, the most important thing that I would tell anybody in crisis, and I wish they could implement this in school, is people need to meditate, because in the silence you touch God. I swear this is true, and you have to be committed. It has to be an everyday thing to meditate. I think that the youth today are lost. I really do. I have a lot of nieces, beautiful girls and nephews, and they seem lost to me, and that's because they don't have they have so much bombardment of information, their mind doesn't know where to go, and where to go is inside yourself, in your in your own center. And that's what we have to teach our youth, is they have to center themselves within themselves, because guess what, all the answers are there if you take the time to silence your mind and hear it.
No,
I
I definitely hear what
let
you
one
said, yeah, but I definitely want to hear more about what you got to say. But one of the things I was curious about, and it might even be where you were going, is that I was on another podcast with some friends of mine recently, and we were noticing how much stuff is out there that is artificial. Because you just mentioned what the kids are going through, and everything along those lines. I mean, you can even get your own artificial pet. I mean, some people are even getting artificial relationships and
well,
all
it's a
in this kind of
distraction.
space. And I'm wondering, isn't that kind of part of the problem? Is that there isn't enough natural things and enough
Oh,
reality that people are
absolutely.
actually being in touch with.
Okay, if you're distracted, what's distraction? The phone,
Mhm.
watching TV, listening to crazy things on the internet. All those are distractions that keep people from really thinking and going within. We have to go within. That's the key. That's the answer here. I'm working on developing uh, to have healing circles for the youth. I don't even want to get paid for it. I just want to do it. And I want to invite whoever wants to come, because, you were in a Jesuit church,
University.
university. So I think I don't have to tell you, ritual
Hmm.
is a way to focus and funnel energy.
Hmm.
And when you make a ritual for a certain intent, it just makes it that more powerful. So my intent is to make ritual healing circles for the youth so they can focus themselves on going within and healing. And that's really where I want to go with it. I mean, I do love my fantasy books. I know on all my podcasts I never talk about my book. I always talk about this,
Well,
you
that's
know.
a problem with the fantasy. Well, I was going to say, but part of the intent, it sounds like you're also wanting to have the fantasy books go to a certain direction and everything. And I find a lot of the
Well, it
fantasy
is.
books, and I find a lot of fantasy books are actually more like we just mentioned earlier. They're morality tales. A lot of people were very
Mhm,
much in the African American community fans of the whole notion of Black Panther and Wakanda
mhm.
Forever, and all along those lines. But if you follow those stories, there was a lot of narration about a number of things, including some cultural differences. Because I do remember one of the groups, I think it was a group from the water, was more Latin based and everything. And then, of course, the Wakanda kind of folks were more African American kind of centered and all along those lines. And then you think about the newer ones that have been out recently as well, like Warrior King, which is definitely talking about a true group of folks that were true warriors, that were women warriors. And I think that sometimes we dismiss women as only being nurturers when there have been some great stories, whether it's Warrior King or whether it's Wonder Woman, that are about warrior classes that are there. And there have been a number of them around the world that have been warrior oriented and all in that space. So I think we sometimes dismiss women as warriors. Not saying that women are nurturers. I think men can be nurturers as well. But there have been some true I'll just put it bluntly and everything. There've been some true badass women out
Oh
there
yeah.
that can handle their own, including even in that gang culture that you were talking about
Hmm.
as well. So there have definitely been some kick-ass folks in that space as well. But I was just wondering your thoughts about those kind of thoughts as to whether we are too busy trying to pigeonhole people into certain categories. Like women are only going to be nurturers, men are only going to be the ones that are warriors, and all in that space. And I think that there have been some things out there that have shattered those kind of myths, and I think that they should be shattered to some degree.
Well, yeah. So in the book, I almost feel guilty because there's not enough time to tell you why I wrote what I wrote, but uh, the reason it's called Anubis Chronicles is because it's about a council created by the gods, the ancient gods, headed by the Anubis, the god of death, the god of the underworld for Egypt. So it starts out that this council is starting in Egypt, but it has people from every culture. There's a Mexican goddess in there. There's a African uh, warlock that is very powerful, and there's all these people in this council, and I feel like why did I started in Egypt? I could have started it in the temples in Mexico, but don't ask me why. I did it in Egypt, but there's going to be women warriors, and there's Latino warriors, there's African warriors, there's Japanese warriors, and there's white, like from Ireland, and all these kind of supernatural creatures. And it's an epic story, and I do believe that we need these stories to reflect on what we are and what we've done. I'll give a little hint on there's these evil elves that position themselves to be monarchies in our world.
Oh wow, that's an interesting hint and everything.
Well, it's
We might
kind
need
of like I said to myself, I hope nobody does a hit on me because I wrote that. And like, that's why, the monarchy, they stay within themselves.
to.
Oh, it's just a mess.
No, that's interesting you say that. I was just wondering, and we're going to wrap up shortly and everything. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. We'll have to continue this later on and maybe even have a part two and all along those lines. But one thing that I was curious about is, do you think that we pay enough attention to the connection we have to our ancestors? I know it's very important to
No.
the Latin culture and a number of other cultures, because I sometimes think that there are things that they taught us, and I'm going to use Mexico as an example, that we have not fully understand, because it is my understanding, and I do not claim to be a 100% environmentalist, meaning knowing all the ins and outs of science, even though I try to do environmental things on my own and everything. But if I look at the irrigation that the Mayans had, and maybe even the Aztecs, speaking of Mexico and Peru and all of those areas, I don't know that we have fully understood how those things were created and how effective they were. Just like I don't think that we've totally understood how, one, the pyramids were created, and two, how they were still standing to this day and everything. I mean, they've got folks that are theorizing that it might have been outer worldly, but I personally think that it was good old folks here that has had some amazing ingenuity, and that we haven't tapped into that ingenuity as much as we probably could and should. But I was wondering your thoughts about that.
Well, they say we only use 5% of our brain. I
Exactly.
mean, and I believe it. There's a lot of evidence to prove that we're capable of a tremendous amount of things with our energy. I can't remember the exact numbers, but one person is capable of producing, I don't know how many kilowatts of energy. It's like a ridiculous amount. People should look that up. How much energy can one person produce? Electrical energy, and it's a lot. So yes, yes, there's we're still learning about ourselves. We're still young, and that's why we have to go within. I'm not gonna. I can't say it too much. As you go within, you know that when do you meditate?
I try to meditate, or at least do some self meditation. I don't know that I do it in the traditional sense of like the ways that it is trained meditation, but I know that when I wake up in the morning, I try to reflect on the day ahead, but also the day past. And there are times that I will take some quiet time, and I am a big fan of going out and observing nature. To me, that is meditation time as well. Like I'm going to sit there and might even reflect on what's going on, and sometimes it might even be to that story book kind of mentality. I know that recently I was, because I get around by mass transit, and I was at a bus terminal, and there was a black cat that was out there much further from me and not crossing my path or everything. But I was thinking to myself, the whole stories around one, what was the black cat doing there, and what was the black cat's have kind of like having a was it symbolic of some things going on in Durham when he was probably just looking for food, because there has definitely been a whole nest of birds that hang out around there as well. And this was late night, so the birds had already gone. And I also know that there are some vermin types. I'll just leave it that way. You can figure out what the vermins are and everything that he might have also been hunting, and that would definitely be at nighttime. So they're just reflecting on what I see nature wise is very much meditative to me as well, is the long and short of what I'm trying to say.
Well, the reason I asked you that is because when you're meditating and you fall into the silence, you get answers, literal answers. But the thing is, and I'm not the only one who says it. Anybody who's an avid meditator says it. If you get an answer to a question, or not even a question, but you get some kind of divine truth, if you don't get up and write it down
Mm-hmm.
that minute after you finish meditating, it's gone.
Yeah,
It's
it's the
really
same thing. Yeah.
strange. It's very strange phenomena, but it's gone. So
Yeah,
you
it's the
have
same thing that happens with dreams, which frustrates me because I do know that sometimes I will get messages from dreams, because I definitely think that sometimes they might be ancestral connections, or they might just be
yes.
something from my dreams. And sometimes I try to write them down when I wake up and reflect on them later in part of the meditation. But there have been a number of times that I have,
Mhm.
gone back into the busy nature of the day and then forgotten what the dream was, and there might have been a message to the dream that I might have missed because I didn't write it down. So I do think
Right.
that you do need to write down, because a lot of times the messages are being sent for a reason.
Yeah, so you have to have like a folder, a journal to do that with right after you meditate, you know.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Well, this is, like I said, been a fascinating conversation. I know that I've got to get ready to go to this other meeting, but one thing I get to all my guests to do, and I definitely hope that you will come back in the near future, because sometimes there can be anywhere from an hour, and this has been close to like 50 minutes or something like that,
Yeah.
to an hour and a half to 2 hours. Is if you would tell folks, I'm gonna get off the screen for a second and everything, how you can be reached as much as you want to tell about the books and everything. And one of the things that I get to all my guests to do is tell their, and you've been doing a lot during the course of our conversation, their personal message of hope and healing for the universe and for the world, because we are heard in a multitude of countries. I've heard as many as 175 to 200 during the course of the weeks after the recording, and all in that space. So, and in this time that we are in, anything that I can do to help make the world a better place is something that I try to do on my own personal journey and all along those lines. So if you want to give a message of hope and healing, as well as how folks can reach you and anything that you want to share about the book.
Absolutely. So I want to show you my book. This is my book. It's the Anubis Chronicles. You can reach me at my website, which is my name, YvonneGarciaZaire.com, or that's also my email, YvonneGarciaZaire@gmail.com. And my hope and my wish is that everybody meditate, go within. All answers are within you. And I know that you just have to be dedicated and meditate, and you will find the answers that you're searching for. You don't have to go to other people or other places. The answers are within you. And I hope you enjoy my book. And um, I look forward to talking to you again. Thank you.
Look forward to having you back on again in the near future and everything. I definitely think folks have gathered a lot from you and your knowledge, your life story, and a number of other things. So I look forward to having you back on in the near future to share even more of this story and the amazing things that you are doing as a writer, whether that is in the field of plays or whether that is in the field of books or a number of other things. What advice would you give folks really quickly if they are thinking that they want to write a book or they want to write a play? Because I know everybody thinks that they have the best book or play in their mind, but some folks are afraid to go after the prize, for lack of a better term.
I say just write, 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 write. That's what you do is you write. And then when you're finished writing, then you can start thinking about, do I want to really make this a book? And there's tons of ways to do it. You just have to be dedicated, like anything else in life. You have to be determined and dedicated and unwavering.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. As we're heading out the door, what is the one advice that you would give to an older person? I asked you about the younger person, but for those people that are like, say, in their 50s or 60s, what is something that you wish that you knew at that particular time in life that you are in and now, if you had been able to get advice from an older person that has passed on? Because we definitely have our connections to our ancestors. So now that you are in your 50s, because you mentioned that, what is something that you wish your dad or your mom had passed on to you about getting to this point of life that you wish you had that lesson, or maybe they already gave you that lesson?
Well, I mean, I think the most precious lesson in the world is to live every moment at a time, because the past is gone, the future might never come, but we have this moment. And if people could learn to embrace this moment, their life would be more richer, aside from meditating. Everybody needs to meditate. That's my big message.
Definitely sounds great. Well, we're going to go out with that same little robotic thing that got us on at the beginning and all in that space. But definitely, this has been a fun conversation, and I look forward to having you back on in the near future. And definitely, I look forward to having more of these type of conversations, because I do agree we need to meditate, and there's so much lessons that we can learn from each other. And you have been an amazing guest, and I hope to have you come back on in the near future.
Thank you. It was a rough start there, but we got it.
Yep, definitely.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
No, no problem. And definitely, hopefully, folks will be reaching out to you and getting copies of that book and all along those lines. So hopefully, you'll be getting some significant sales as well.
Well, you know what? I want to tell the readers that, I mean, the listeners, if you send me a message and you bought my book, I will send you a papyrus bookmarker that I got in Egypt. I got a whole bunch of them to sell to give away with my book.
That sounds amazing. So hopefully, you'll get a lot of folks telling you that they've got that and they can add to the papyrus bookmark collection that they can have in their book as well. So it looks like that would be an amazing gift, and hopefully, a lot of folks will be taking advantage of that.
All right. Thank you, Mark. I really appreciate you.
No problem. You have a great day.
You too.